that all of you came because these are two of my favorite people in the world. Two of the smartest, most accomplished, and funniest people I know.
Who's she talking to?
And how many Niner fans do I have? I feel like I have some faithful in the house. Nice. Okay. Raider fans? Oh, wow. You kind of belong here. We'll protect her. Well, I actually met Amy when I was in the Silver and Black as a PR intern. And neither of us will tell you.
PR?
Yeah. Neither of us will tell you when that was. A long time ago. And she was the type of person who would take interns sort of under her wing. And so I'm excited that you guys all get to get kind of a flavor of being under her wing today. And for all the faithful Lisa's in the house, you know it was our bye this last weekend. So I was watching on CBS Sports Network, where Amy now is an analyst. They had their show on, and there was this, sort of young blonde reporter who transitions from the on-set folks to the on-field reporters. And one of the guys on set was talking over her, and she went, "Shh, who's talking?" And then she giggled like she wasn't totally sure of herself, and said, "Just kidding. Amy taught me some tricks about taking control." And I love that, but I also love that then you hear Amy off stage go, "You go, girl." It epitomized Amy, because not only was she willing to sort of share from her wealth of knowledge about power, which if you don't know anything about Amy, this is a powerful woman who is the chief executive of the Oakland Raiders, who rose to that position within the ranks, who started there as an intern in law school. But she was also totally supportive, even when that young woman wasn't completely ready to own that power yet. So I love that about Amy. And the other amazing woman on this stage, Andrea Kremer, I actually remember the first time I saw her because it was when I was a PR intern at the Oakland Raiders at training camp in Napa. And I see this tiny blonde fireball of a woman in a red dress on this green field. And she is telling Lincoln Kennedy, who here knows who Lincoln Kennedy is, even if you're not Raiders fans, right? A 300-pound man, where to sit,
300?
How to handle this interview.
340.
Yeah, I'm being kind. And she just had, even though he outweighed her by, quadruple her weight, she just had this incredible, commanding presence and energy about her. And at that time, Andrea was a national correspondent for ESPN. She went on to be the sideline reporter for Sunday Night Football on NBC for 5 seasons. And while at NBC, she also covered the London Olympics and a number of other sports. She's now the chief health and safety correspondent for NFL Network. And she also is a correspondent for the critically acclaimed HBO's Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel. She also, I learned recently, teaches a class at Boston University called The Art of the Interview. And even though we can't crash that class here tonight, I think you're going to get a little flavor of it, because we're going to kind of just let the two of them go. We'll stop with about a half hour for questions. I know, dangerous, isn't it?
Hannah, I will tell you
that
in terms of interviewing skills, very early in my career when I met Andrea, and my husband and I were later discussing the work she did, and we would tune into television, we would watch her reducing people to tears, only because she's so smart, not because she was trying. My husband looked at me and said, "Do not ever, ever, ever let her interview you." So,
and on that note, I'm going to let her interview.
Well, no, the way when this opportunity came to us through Hannah, I looked at Rob and I said, "What do you think after all these years?" He said, "Yeah, it's not really an interview. Go ahead, do it."
Well, first of all, thanks to Hannah.
Thank
we
you,
appreciate
Hannah.
that very eloquent introduction. And just a couple of things here. First of all, we're here for you. We have taken time out of our schedules because we think it's important to be at events like this. And we want to be able to talk to you about things that are important to you. So that being said, throughout the course of our conversation, if you've got questions that are germane to what we're talking about, I'd rather you raise your hand and interject at that time than wait till the end and you can't remember what it was about. But certainly we also are going to take questions at the end of
and just to be clear, she's here for you. I'm here kind of for me, right? But I'm here for Hannah, because someday when Hannah is the first female president of the United States, I'm going to remind her that I drove across the bridge to come to Stanford.
How about that I flew across the country to do this? So just to give you a sense of both the culture as well, the work culture as well as our personal relationship. Ms. Trask and I met in 1989. Anybody born then? Just to make me feel a little bit, okay, good, thank you. In, most appropriately, the ladies' room of a hotel at the Chicago airport when we were both there covering, I was covering, she was participating in as the, one of the
club representatives
for the Oakland Raiders and the owners' meetings. We were both the only women there.
I was the only woman in the meeting, and Andrea was the only woman covering the meeting. And we found ourselves in the restroom, and
we walk in, and we kind of, we know who each other is. We sort of look at each other, and that sort of way that women can sometimes do it at first, or, the nod of the head, and then acknowledging. And then, for some reason, my recollection is just, God bless you, my recollection is, it's just you and I, babe, so,
I think I said, well, there's not a line in the ladies' room.
And there wasn't, and that has started a personal and professional relationship that is very dear to me. And there is, when I did this event 2 years ago at Stanford, it was a bit of a different format. But at that time, I gave homework to the group. And so before I forget, I want to give homework now, and that is, there's a story in the New York Times business section on October 13th in the corner office column called Women and Leadership. And I strongly urge, especially the women in the audience, but the men as well, to read it. It's funny because 2 years ago, the homework I gave was to go Google and find Sheryl Sandberg's commencement speech at Barnard, which later turned into Lean In, so I was ahead of the curve on that one. But one of the reasons I urge you to read this story is that not only is it interesting and germane to, I think, to what you're doing, but as it turns out, and I reread it this morning, I would venture to say that almost all of the points in there that these 4 female executives make about leadership, all things that Amy Trask has lived and built her career on. I really mean that. From the way that you support colleagues and the way that you don't just advance a woman because she's a woman. So many different things. I'm telling you, when I read this story, it reminded me of you and all the things that you built your career on.
Well, thank you. And Hannah, I'm sure you had a chance to, particularly while you were with the National Football League and you had that outward-facing look at all 32 clubs. There's a management style that was urged upon me very early. I was advised by many very, very well-intended, well-meaning people that there should only ever be one star in a galaxy. And you want to make sure that in your galaxy, which is your organization, you're that star. And you need to do whatever you have to do to be the star and keep anyone else from turning into a star. And I thought, I couldn't disagree with that philosophy more. Thank you very much. I appreciate your input. Thanks so much for the advice. I think that's insane. Why would you want a galaxy with one star in it when if you have a galaxy where everyone is a star, you have the brightest galaxy? So my management style was always to try to create an environment in which absolutely every person could be a star, because then you're going to have a brighter galaxy than anybody else.
Well, I don't know if you found this, if you've come across this in any aspect of your career, just observing other people's, but one of the things that I find these days is people are so risk adverse, and they're all about, I gotta cover my butt. I gotta cover myself. I gotta look out for myself. That to me, that's antithetical to everything I've ever done, because I've always tried to take risks, especially creative risks.
And I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. Someone once told me very, very, very early in my career, the only people who don't make mistakes are people who aren't trying anything. Right. And I shared with Hannah earlier a story I used to share at the office all the time was my brother and his wife are doctors. And if my brother is in the middle of a surgical procedure and he screams, "Oh no," or "Oh, something worse," okay, that's a problem. particularly if you're the person on whom he's performing the surgical procedure. If his hands are in your body and he's screaming, "Holy crap," that's a problem. For those of us in business, problems happen. Take a risk, fix them. And that's where you ended up with Emmys. You've taken risks your whole career. How hard is it to do that in the world of television?
You're asking me a question.
I am, I did. I just did that. Isn't that
And
great?
it was good. It was a lean question. It wasn't a yes or no question. Good for you. What was the question again? Sorry.
This is pretty good. I've never done this before. Maybe I'll make you cry. How hard is it in the environment of being a journalist and one that excels at in-depth, long-form, meaty journalism? Is it to convince other people to take risks?
Other people that I work with, or you mean the people that I'm trying to interview?
Both.
I remember one time back when I was at ESPN and another football season was starting, and there's kind of like that Dog Day afternoon feel, like here we go again.
Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day, right. And the producer said to me, how do you do it every year, year after year? It feels like, you know, sort of the same stories or the same this. And I said, I don't view it that way. And actually, the day that I do view it that way is the day that I have to get out. Because to me, the challenge is always, how do you find new stories, or maybe the same types, but find different ways to tell them? Find a different angle, find a different way to approach something. And in some ways, it's sort of not unlike that Broadway actor who has to do the same dialogue for days, weeks, months, years, because they're on Broadway and this is what they do. And where do they find the motivation to bring something different to it every day?
Where do they?
I assume that they bring it part of the way that I've approached it, which is I can always improve upon this. I mean, I don't think there's ever been an interview that I've done, I don't care how good I feel about it, that the first thing that I think about isn't, oh, I should have asked this, or I should have done this, or I wish, because that's just the way that I approach things.
What's the hardest interview you've ever done?
Oh, no, I'd have to done a whole lot of them.
Any that touched you more or moved you more than others?
The hardest to speak generally, the hardest ones are the really personal ones. And I've been in situations in my career which I feel grateful for, where I've done exclusives and they've had to do with death or loss, and particularly of a child. So the hardest interview I've ever done was probably with, I'm sorry to bring this up, this is mean.
Oh no.
Well, it's Joe Jurevicius of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We don't want to say who they beat in the Super Bowl that year. But,
really?
Yeah, but that year, while he was playing the Super Bowl, his first child was born, and the child never came out of the hospital and actually died at 40 days old. And Joe went through the Super Bowl with this, carrying this burden, won a ring, and I ended up sitting down with he and his wife at their home in Tampa, and it was so hard. First of all, I had a 1-year-old at the time, so you know, you always tend to internalize other people's tragedies, I think. And they did it because they felt that it was cathartic for them to talk about it, and they wanted to show other people who might be dealing with such traumatic loss that you can come through something like that with grace, and there is a way to deal with such tragedy. And they never talked about it ever again, ever with anybody else. And it was really hard to deal with. I mean, such incredible emotion. And you know, when you see stories and there's usually a camera on the interviewer, on the correspondent. We had 2 cameras. We actually had 3 cameras in this interview. I never appear on camera because I cried throughout the interview. I couldn't help it. I mean, that's where stories like that have always taught me something very, very important about what I do in this business. I don't think enough people think about it. See, I'm telling you about this story that I did, and it was a story that I did, but it was somebody's life. and you never can lose sight of that. It's my story, it's your life. And if you ever do forget that, it is a really bad thing. And so, and I'd like to think that that's a lot of the reasons that I have been able to get people to talk about it. I just did a story a couple weeks ago that just aired a few weeks ago on a player for the Green Bay Packers who was a drug addict and addicted to this just horrible drug called Purple Drank. It's codeine, and he was.
I had to Google that a few years ago.
Yeah. Oh yes, you did. Oh, I'm not bringing that up. Jamarcus Russell. Oh, excuse me. It
does make for a little awkward moment in the house when you're on the computer and your husband walks through and you've got every single screen open to Scissorp and Purple Drank and what are you doing, honey?
Yeah, really.
Remember we were talking earlier about when that phone rings at 3 a.m. It's usually not a good
bad
thing.
thing.
Yeah.
But the story, you know, this player was suspended 3 times by the NFL and ended up in prison, and I interviewed him, as it turns out, in prison. And then he came out and was reinstated by the NFL, completed his treatment program, ended up re-signing with the same team, same locker, same jersey, goes back and is a starter again. Did the first interview with him when he came back, and it was really just, again, an interesting
Can I embarrass
story.
really quickly?
Who are you going to embarrass?
Another very, very impressive Bay Area woman who just runs the whole Comcast digital media platform just walked in the room.
Yeah, you should be down here with us.
You really should. Bring a chair.
Nancy Gay, ladies and
Nancy
gentlemen.
Gay, Comcast Sports. Click on it a lot. Go to her site. It's great. You just missed our whole discourse on Purple Drank and Scissor.
I'm well aware.
Long-time beat writer and columnist. But so for someone who was, I'm trying to think of the best adjective. Loathsome of the media? Is that, would that be fair? For someone who, we'll be kinder.
A respectful distance?
From the media, for your entire 26-year-long career in professional football, how's it feel to be in the dark side, babe?
Let me answer that in a few ways. Number one, I don't consider myself part of the media. I'm an opinionator. I made that word up. I'll be.
That's like the Wizinator, right?
Can we look into somehow protecting that intellectual property right? I was sharing with Hannah earlier, when I resigned my position at the Raiders in May, I had no plan, no thought, no idea, no strategy, no concept of what I would do next. Pretty smart, huh? But if you'd asked me at that point to make a list of 10,000 things I might do, I will guarantee you being on television doesn't crack 10,000. Doesn't crack it. Andrea's right, particularly with respect to cameras. If I saw a television camera pointed in my direction, I could run faster than Usain Bolt the opposite direction. I mean, pretty crazy.
In heels.
Yeah, pretty crazy to see this little lady in her little kitten heels running the opposite direction. And when I first got the phone call, would you be interested in doing this? You know, I've worked in football for almost 30 years. A lot of words came out of my mouth that I learned over the course of
That would be appropriate in a locker room.
They would be.
There you go.
And I said, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to go on camera. Dear people up there, Vicky, I was sitting with Vicky. I can't do this. I can't do this. I'm not going on camera. Yes, you can. No, I can't. I'll throw up all over myself. You know, well, that'll get good ratings. I decided to give it a try. So I'm giving it a try.
But see, something like that is really, really important. I mean, I made a change after 17 years in one place, and it's an okay thing to take risks. I mean, we were talking about that before. And I think that what's unique about what you do is to prove, this may not be the most politically correct thing I've ever said, but why start now, is, you know.
We're at Stanford, you know.
That's all right.
Okay.
There is a tendency in, I have to say our, because I am in the media business, in our business, to hire people for their looks with
This isn't really going to go well for me, I don't think.
With little regard for their qualifications. And it's a problem. And I think that Amy brings such credibility. And listen, I'm going to say this straight out, my opinion. If Amy Trask did more than just stay on the business side of that team across the bay, they would not be in the position they're in now. There's most teams have a strong separation of football operations and business operations, but there has to be synergy to an extent, I think, in any business. And what I love, and the example, you've spoken of it on the air, was the horrific decision to sign Matt Flynn to an overpriced contract at quarterback at the expense of Terrell Pryor at that time. And you said that from day one, and it completely was borne out. And you know what? You didn't have to make decisions, but it does get back to something interesting, which I've discussed with many, many people. Women look at things differently, especially women in male-dominated professions. Last I checked, that would include football. And
you raised something. You talked about a division, and one of my pet peeves are people that do want to create a separation, if you will, of football and business, or of church and state, which is how it can be looked at in the industry. I think that's crazy. I think the 49ers do a better job than probably, if not every other team. Certainly you are in the very top teams. Baltimore's another one that comes to mind, where there's an absolute integration and synergy. How do you separate football and business when your business is football? I mean, that's just crazy to me. And the first time I visited your offices, Hannah, I was just thrilled that you can be walking into to meet with the CFO, who could be sitting in a room next to where the defensive coaching staff is working. It's just, I don't believe that there should be a division between football and certainly, and people can misinterpret that. Of course your CPA is not going to be dictating what play you run on third down. Nobody's going to go to your CFO and ask him, to carve up the 53-man roster. No one's going to go into your attorney and say, tell us where you feel comfortable taking that field goal from. Hannah would have the right answer, but the point is, when you say that there shouldn't be a separation, you understand everybody has a job to do. You're no sooner going to allow the equipment manager to go into court to make your case than you're going to allow the lawyer to make the decision on which spikes to wear, which cleats to wear on a certain turf. But there does need to be an integration between football and business, and you guys really do that among the best clubs in the league. And I'd say Baltimore's another one that does a phenomenal job at that.
So what's the best thing and the worst thing so far about working but not really working in the media?
The best thing is that I haven't yet thrown up all over myself. That was sort of the bar I set. Vicki knows that was the bar I set for myself on week one. Don't do anything horrifying. I'm more comfortable on camera each week, so that's good. The worst thing, I am a fish out of water at this point, and I'm learning to navigate my way in something entirely new. And if someone in this room could effectuate the LBO of CBS to move it to California, that would be very helpful as well. I think they'd do well to have a studio in Malibu.
But you know what? Back to what I...
And by the way, for the 49er website thing, don't put that whole LBO CBS thing on it.
No, just put the thing in there about
Malibu.
No, the 49ers do something so much better than the Raiders. Make sure that gets in there. But what I
didn't say I
said it. I said it. It's all right. But I am curious about this, because I know I have my thoughts on it. What do you think are the differences in football, since that's the profession that we've both worked in for 30 plus years? What do you think the differences are in the way that men and women view the game and all the ancillary?
I don't know if there is. I don't know, and I want you to answer this one too. Hey, are you in that industry? Because you asked some good questions. Do you do that for a living? I don't think there is a difference in the way we view the game. I think, and Hannah, it would be interesting to hear your take on this as well, and Nancy, when you're at a game and you're with all your colleagues, male or female, when you're together, you're viewing the game in precisely the same way, I believe. I haven't discerned a difference. Look, I had a tremendous, tremendous privilege that a lot of the women in this room either haven't had or may not have, which is I worked for a business owner who was absolutely positively unconcerned with gender. And you know, for all of you 49er fans and other fans, whatever you may or may not think of Al Davis, there's a track record of diversity and inclusiveness there for which he deserves tremendous, tremendous, tremendous accolades, with whether it's hiring Tom Flores as the first Hispanic head coach, or me as the first female executive, or Art Shell as the first African-American head coach of modern times. There's a track record there of diversity and inclusiveness. And I did have the privilege of working in an organization where the owner was absolutely blind to gender, racial, ethnic, religious, and other differences. So there was a culture there where I don't think there was the big difference in the way women or men would necessarily approach the game, and I recognize that that's a privilege that everyone doesn't enjoy. But how do you think it differs?
Well, there's one thing that I found. It's not as though I've done a scientific poll on this, but I've been in enough locker rooms, so I'm going to use that as my laboratory. And this is one of the things that I talk about in my class. So, now you tell me if you found this as well, Nance.
So Nancy Gay was with the San Francisco Chronicle. That's how I met her. She was covering the Raiders, and she went on to Fox and all these wonderful things, and she is and
I think actually Nancy and I met we met in '89 at Awesome, right, at the Associated Women's Sports Media. So
and she is a Hall of Fame voter.
Yeah, that's right, one of the very, very few women. So tell me if you found this. Okay, so locker room, post-game. Male reporter goes up to Colin Kaepernick. Well, Colin, on that third down play when you missed your hot read, and when the receiver ran the wrong route, and the tackle missed the block, yeah, that was really tough. Female reporter walks up to Colin Kaepernick. Colin, what happened on that third down play? So what I've found, have you experienced this?
You know what's interesting, and I found that perhaps you or I would ask him the question this way. Colin, what were you thinking when that third down play fell apart?
Right.
And that play broke down and you
Right.
were forced to improvise.
Right.
What were you thinking versus talk about it?
Right. But not even just talk about. There is a tendency for, I'm not stereotyping, nor am I saying in any way that this is always the way it happens, but there's a tendency for male reporters to basically unload everything they know, because I'm a man and I know about football, and I got to tell you about it. Now, the woman, I've always maintained this. I don't have an ego going in. All I want is for you to give me a great answer. Now, if you give me a great answer because you don't think that I know what I'm talking about, or that I didn't play the game, see, I can't get involved in the ego of it. I just know I want to ask you a question that's going to get the best answer. And I found this consistently. And that's just one of the big differences that I found, is that you don't need to prove everything all the time. At some point, you know, they're going to know that you know what you're talking about. You just don't have to advertise it all the time, because it's not about you and everything that you know. It's about them as your interview subject. So that's one difference that I've found pretty consistently.
And I would say from a business operations standpoint, I've worked with women that are just phenomenal teammates and women that aren't. And I've worked with men that are just phenomenal teammates and men that aren't. And I haven't sensed that much of I haven't sensed a gender difference. I think people are different, and some teammates are terrific and some teammates aren't, but I haven't sensed those cutting down gender lines.
Yeah, no, I think that, I also think that there's a tendency, I mean, when I talk to women about football, there's just as many women who want to know about the intricacies of the cover two, and they want to break down the zone blitz. I mean, they want the X's and O's just as much as the men. Then there's women who couldn't tell you the difference between a first down and a down blanket. They just don't know.
But there's men that are that way too.
And there are men
that are that way.
But the men will never admit that. I mean, you know, that's it. I've always said this. There's not a gene, G-E-N-E, that tells you that you know about football. And I mean, I remember. I mean, I tell this to young people who are trying to break into the business. Don't BS your way through something. You can't do that. If you don't know something, ask, and you can learn in it. And I think people will appreciate that.
But again, and that goes across both gender lines. Okay.
Right, but I would, when the Vikings, Minnesota Vikings, were sort of in their heyday, when Brian Billick was their offensive coordinator, I would be in there doing Vikings games, and it would be a Saturday afternoon. And just because I'm a geek, because I love this stuff, I wanted to go in, and I would sit with him, and he would break down like the whole offensive game plan, you know, with everything, with the pointer and the tape and the X's and O's, the whiteboard and stuff like this. And he would say, "I'll spend as much time with you as you want, as long as I can get home and get my nap before I have to, you know, report for evening meetings." And I love that. And it wasn't something that I could necessarily use, but it was really cool for me because I learned a lot. And then when the game was the next day, I could literally see it develop before my eyes, and I was just always really interested in that. But you know, I started off at NFL Films, where I watched film for years and years and years, and that gave me not only an appreciation and a knowledge of the history of the game, but also, again, the intricacies, the X's and O's. And I don't see male reporters.
Well, again, and I was talking about my world,
right,
which was the business world and finances and just sort of all the business operations of a team. I found that there were women who were willing to ask questions and women who weren't, and men who were willing to ask questions and men who weren't.
Right.
You know, there's a young woman in the room, Anya Schultz, who is, I'm going to say it, it's my school. I'm here on Stanford. She's at Cal, all right? She's at Cal. Don't throw anything at her or at me. But she's breaking into sports right now and just had the opportunity to travel with the Cal football team. We do have a football team. The Cal football, really, we do, okay? We do. And so it'll be really, I would think, fascinating for Anya to hear some of what you're saying about navigating these worlds.
Well, yes, sir. No.
We do have a football team, if that's what you're going to ask. Okay.
So the NFL just recently received a C+ in
It's because I resigned. They used to get A's.
C+ the year before as well. But what grade would you give the NFL? I'm curious to hear. You had a great experience with Mr. Davis, giving you the opportunities to be able to but NFL-wide, C+.
And you're talking specifically gender?
Gender
Yeah.
practices and gender initiatives.
Yeah, I don't know what I would give the league as a whole, because I tend to look team by team, and I know what our practice was in terms of diversity and inclusiveness, and of course Hannah's leading all of the legal affairs for the 49ers, so you know that's obviously an A+. You know, is there more work to be done? Sure. I'd have to think through the league as a whole, certainly, or the two clubs represented here tonight are more progressive than the other clubs, I would suggest.
You were the highest ranking female executive in the National Football League, and you weren't related to anybody in the organization. No. Sadly, I'm serious. I mean, that's the other high-ranking women.
I keep yelling at my dad about that.
Daughters of the owner or something like that, and I think that's so. It's great when you're always introduced as that highest ranking woman, but that caveat is a pretty important one.
Yeah, what would you give the league as a whole?
I feel that, once again, women are not represented on the football side.
With the exception of Donna Ponte down in Miami. Oh,
That's a real good thing to be
right
associated with right now.
Maybe I shouldn't have brought up that. But Dawn is in there, handles her salary cap.
Right. That's right.
It
Came from the league office and worked for the Jets and the Browns and had that experience. But I feel that women are not represented on the football side at all. I mean, the Buffalo Bills had a scout named Linda Bogdan, who actually was the owner, Ralph Wilson's daughter. And she was pretty respected as a scout. Unfortunately, she has since passed away. But, you know, and there's talk of actually bringing in a female official, which is a little bit off,
which I think
here.
Happened in the preseason.
Right. But in terms of football, here's one thing, and I've had this discussion. I mean, in my opinion, one of the best scouts / personnel men, he is the general manager of the Baltimore Ravens, is Ozzie Newsome, the Hall of Fame tight end. And Ozzie and I were talking one time, and we were just talking about, you know, really what makes a good scout. And, you know, you have to comb through the background and stuff like this, but Ozzie was meticulous about literally going back to the hometown for when the kid is in high school and talking to everybody that he possibly could. Because, you know, think about it. These teams are about to make a multi-million-dollar long-term investment on somebody. And especially has been proven, you really need to know what you're investing in. And Ozzie believes so strongly in this philosophy. And to me, if you had a female that was in that position, I guarantee you, the right person, not someone who's there because they're a female, someone who's got the credentials, and oh, by the way, they're a woman, I guarantee you that women would unearth more about these prospects, these athletes. I just do. I think that, why? Because they would ask different questions. They wouldn't get hung up on just the physical. They would know how to relate differently to people. And you could strike up a conversation differently. And I think that
a female scout would have recognized that Jonathan Martin, for example, was probably going to come into the league with a higher, let's just say, IQ, a different background than most of his teammates, perhaps a little more sensitive or maybe a little more intuitive than some of them. And would that have been written into your report? And as a scout, would you have recommended him as a female scout to your general manager, knowing those things and knowing your male general manager might not appreciate those things that you might see in the quality?
Well, interestingly, I've had conversations, as I'm sure you have too, and I'd be curious about your experience, where, again, not meaning to generalize and not stereotyping here, but there are occasions where head coaches don't want players that are that smart. They want players that are football smart. But all of a sudden, if you have a certain level of intellect, you might actually question them in ways that they don't want you to question them.
I always want any business with which I'm associated to have the smartest people in every role, period. So I hear what you're saying. Mm-hmm. You are right. There are people that have that viewpoint. I think that's crazy. I want the smartest people in every role possible.
Yeah,
I may be in the minority, and
that could be a gender difference.
You know, it would be interesting to hear Andrea and Nancy weigh on this because they spent time in locker rooms in an entirely different role than from the management side. Locker rooms is an issue this week. Nancy brought up the Jonathan Martin situation, the Richie Incognito situation. Locker rooms, what goes on in locker rooms is a very, very hot topic right now. I can tell you, in my almost 30 years in the league, I never encountered a player that had an issue with my gender. Didn't happen. I never interacted with a player that I think would have been bothered if there was someone with a different sexual orientation in the locker room. There is what we call the locker room mentality, but I think it's a lot different. It's certainly different team to team to team to team. but I think at least my experience is that it was much more inclusive than perhaps people would imagine. There's, not to name names, and I won't because I don't have her permission to do so, but there's, think of sort of the most dominating, ferocious, tremendous linebacker you can think of, someone who just dominated the field from the linebacker position and was rough and tough on the field.
And it needs an onomatopoeia like Romanowski. That's a good onomatopoeia, right? His wife's in the room. Nobody better say anything wrong. Julie Romanowski.
Did you notice that I neither said Romanowski nor that you were in the room?
But
did you notice that I did
but
not
we're tag teaming here. This is like.
But here's my point. You might as a fan turn on the TV and watch Bill Romanowski, the player, who is just flying around the field making these incredible tackles and stopping running backs, and yet when he comes off the field, he is one of the most intelligent, articulate, sophisticated, wise men with whom I've interacted in my career, and I guarantee you, he had no issue with me being a woman. He had no concerns about.
Did he? Ladies and gentlemen, Julie Romanowski was kind enough to join us tonight.
So I'd just be interested for you guys, because you guys were in a different role. I was their teammate.
That was actually my employee.
That's actually a great point. And I gave that whole speech to Bill's employer without even thinking of that.
An interesting perspective on the Jonathan Martin case yesterday. From his experience, he recounted his experience as a young player being bullied by Ronnie Watt, and how that affected him, and how he made an effort as he became an older player and he encountered rookies that he felt like he made an effort not to do that. He was very strident in speaking out against what Richie Incognito had done, or what that culture may or may not exist in the Dolphins locker room.
But you two were in the locker room. Look, I was the teammate of these players. I was
every day.
But
I saw bullying every day.
well, and all I was going to say, and let me turn to you, and I was their teammate. I was accepted. Did you two women in the locker room, as Nancy was every day, as you were on game days, did you see a side of the locker room maybe I never did?
Yes. Absolutely. And Andrea can speak to this, but she and I went in there knowing that that was their inner sanctum. The locker room is to be respected as their office. So when you go in there as a media person, and not as a team executive or employee, but you're an outsider who has access to the locker room because the NFL states you get to be in there 45 minutes a day. So you have to be respectful of their space. But then again, they also owe you that time. So it's a little bit of an uncomfortable dance that you do in that 45-minute period. But there are players, and I witnessed Richie Incognito in two different teams, in Miami and in St. Louis, engage in the behavior that we're talking about right now in regard to Jonathan Martin.
Did anyone ever?
Very loud player. He's the kind of player that wanted you to see him all the time.
Anybody in here work? Anybody work? Some people do work, right? Imagine, no, that you're not all students, in other words. Imagine, all right, now you can all do a collective, ooh. Imagine walking into your boss's office or a coworker's office, and he's in a towel. Go ahead, say it. Ooh. That's what the locker room is like. Yes, ma'am. How did you feel about women in the locker room?
I'm going to say something about you, and I'm going to say something about you. One thing that I
Oh dear God.
here and taking a law class is the ethics and the loyalty. These two women here are two of the most ethical women that I've met, and I was in the league for 20 years. Nancy still has utmost respect for you. I think what was something that was so important is that when you gave an interview, and I didn't let a lot of people in our home.
Oh, yes.
You really, really protected and never crossed the line. You were going to be loyal, you were going to be honest, you were going to be forthright, and you always told the truth. And that's something for people in law to think about in this profession. Amy, when I watched you and former players, whether it was Plunkett or Stabler, come back to the stadium and come up and
Well, thank you.
Says a lot.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And God, I'm so glad we invited Julie.
And wait, while we're calling people in the audience out, Brenna Webb is here, and Brenna is with Pac-12. So here you are. You're on one of your campuses, Brenna.
Hi, Brenna. We're off it.
Well, but Brenna, you used to be at the NFL Network, right?
Yeah, I was there for 6 years.
Okay. Why do you think there's a dearth of women in the league at higher levels?
Well, yeah, when I was there, I was part of the diversity and inclusion committee with Robert Bell that actually got started because I guess that was probably in 2010 or 11. They had, and first of all, at the league level, it's very lean, and a lot of people don't leave; they stay there for years. My old boss, Joe Brown, was there. He hired Roger Goodell.
He's still there. He's not leaving. He is not going anywhere.
And that was hard in the PR department because people didn't leave. And so, and they also had very few titles. So you were, your assistant coordinator, manager, director, VP, SVP, EVP. That was pretty much it. And so when promotions came around, it was, few and far between people would be at managers for 15 years before they get promoted. Anyway, a memo went out of promotions, VP promotions, and it was about 9 white males that were promoted. And the memo from Roger was like, we want to, this speaks to our, commitment to diversity. And I guess they got so many emails back that Roger was like, oh my gosh, it was a wake-up call. And so they started this committee, and they hired a chief diversity officer who's now Robert Belliver, who came from Bank of America, and so they really are trying to move. They work with Cyrus Mary, who's a pretty prominent lawyer who works on the committee with the Roonies, and so they are trying to move in that direction. I think it is tough just because, like you were saying, for women there is a lot of nepotism when it comes to at the level, when it comes to owners and getting to that level as a team, and Amy being the only that I can remember female executives that wasn't like Andrea said, that didn't get her spot from her father or grandfather, is a huge deal. And so I think that I've been on that side and I understand it, and that being said, I work with some fantastic people who I learned a lot from, but it is one of those industries where they keep things very lean, and you really have to make sure. That's why it is important to say, what you don't know, and always opening your eyes to opportunities to learn, to move, to grow when you can, because a lot of times people do tend to get stuck in those areas, and they'll stay there just because it's comforting. They know what they know, and they don't like to take a lot of risks. So I would just say, taking risks is very important to move.
Well, Brenna, you talked about that, and now I can actually have some fun now that I see those 49er cameras are gone. You talk about the email about the memo you got about the diversity with that slate of candidates. I used to get so riled up. We would go to what they call 2 per club meetings, where it's the owner plus 1 executive, and then sometimes we would go down to 1 per club, and as Al Davis was aging, I would be the 1. But together, when we were there at the 2 per club, we would have to have the moment where I would look up at the front desk of the league, and it was entirely, shall we say, there was a certain consistency to the whole front desk of 12 people.
And you weren't in that consistency.
And no. And then we would get the lecture on the importance of diversity. And I would like poke at Al. I'm like, we don't have to stay for this. We don't have to stay for this. And shh, calm down, calm down. I'm like, no, why are we sitting here? Why are we, the Raiders, having to sit here being lectured on the importance of diversity and inclusiveness by an entire table of people that look exactly, and I'd get all feisty, and he'd tell me to calm. He's like, where are you going to go anyway? I got mad. Why did I need to be why did he or I need to be lectured on diversity?
So why were...
Because they gave the lecture to
No. Why weren't other teams as progressive?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, Julie, I'm sorry, go ahead. there's been talk about expanding the Rooney Rule to, you know, in a variety of ways.
I never was really good about curbing my opinion. So we sat on a conference call with one person from each of the 32 clubs when they were getting ready to put the Rooney Rule into place. And they went around after they announced it and they said to each club, we're going to now ask each club to give their opinion on the Rooney Rule. And when they got to me, I said, we don't need a Rooney Rule.
Does everybody understand what
here.
the Rooney Rule is?
And so my response was, we don't need a Rooney Rule here. We've been doing this for 3, 4, 5 decades.
Do you want to just explain really quick?
The Rooney Rule is something that was put in a number of years ago, which puts requirements on clubs in the hiring process. It was originally put in with head coaches only. There's a lot of discussion about expanding it to coordinators, expanding it to general managers, and it legislates that in the interview process you include minorities.
And
I guess ultimately I think it's terrific that more people are in the mix. Again, I grew up in an industry in a rarefied environment where we didn't need it to be legislated. I generally think that as human beings we should not need legislation to do the right thing. Clearly, I guess some people do.
And there's a feeling that it's just window dressing. You know, let me just bring the black guy in an interview because I got to do it. But there is merit in that.
And by the way,
even if you have a candidate who's white and you know you're going to hire him, and you do have to bring in an African American.
But why should it only be African American?
Well, it could.
Why shouldn't it be? I mean,
whoever
there's
it could
a lot
be.
of
It could be
people that are
Hispanic,
griping
right?
about that.
It could be, but it could. And my point is, one good thing that does come out of it is that it gives the candidate the opportunity to go through the interview process. And I mean, someone like Tony Dungy, who to me is one of the great coaches and people that you will find in this wacky profession. And he consistently would have these interviews, and the owner would walk away thinking, you know, too nice, you know, not going to be tough enough, not going to be, you know, not going to be hard. Well, that really bore out, right, with all the success that he had, and he wins the Super Bowl. But what happens is the minority gets the experience of interviewing, and hopefully the owner walks away and says, well, you know what, he's not for us, but when somebody else goes to interview him and that owner calls and says, what, you already interviewed, what did you think? There's a good impression that he left. And that's one thing that hopefully does come out of it, aside from, you know, hopefully ultimately.
And my apologies for interrupting you, and to get back to you, and I do apologize, and to get back to your question, if it is expanded beyond coaching to GM positions or exec, it really shouldn't just be one minority. But
he's also asking about women in it.
Well, and that's an interesting question, and I'd never really thought about that before, but Norman Chung, wasn't his last name Chung? Chow, thank you.
Norman Chow.
Who am I conflating?
USC, former USC.
No, but who am I thinking of? I'm thinking of someone
Norman
else.
Chad?
No, I'm thinking of someone from the league off. I apologize. Norman Chow. Why shouldn't he be included in the Rooney Rule? Why shouldn't...
He's Asian American.
Yeah, you know, if you're going to have a rule, why shouldn't it be as broad as possible?
Just wanted to add some perspective. So I'm from India. Here for 40 years, studied at Stanford 30 years ago. My wife's friend's son was heavily into sports. He is heavily into sports. And when he wanted to go get into the broadcast part of sports, he encountered this undercurrent. He was told repeatedly, you're Indian, you're going to get discriminated against. Don't do that. So what's he doing? Working for 20 or 30K in the production side of ESPN because he loves sports, but he didn't have the confidence because he heard all this stuff. So there is this undercurrent that goes on.
Not that I'm trying to prove a pattern here, but just so happens Sanjay Lal, Raider wide receiver coach until ultimately some changes were. So there are people in the industry that your friend's son can talk to about advancing in the industry.
And I love that you two already turned it into the Socratic method. I think that's so appropriate. You started calling on people. We only have about 20 minutes left before we finish, so I want to make sure if people have questions, please, you know, start raising your hand.
By the way, sir, at my station, KNTV, the NBC affiliate here in the Bay Area, we have broadcast
Yes, ma'am.
Oh.
Yes.
Just going off this point, I heard Jacksonville, so it's been interesting to see the reaction to the Jaguars. So I was interested to hear what you guys think the reaction around the league and the media, et cetera, to that.
I was actually in the room when when the purchase was, in the NFL, you cannot sell any piece of a team without getting a vote of the ownership, so let alone a whole team. And I was pleased to be in the room when that vote was had. Vote was had. This is why I don't. This is why I cannot do this.
Berkeley,
for a
you know,
living.
what can we say?
Okay, when we took that vote. And
You're officially in the media, you can't speak.
I have not met anyone, I didn't interact with anyone in the league, whether at the club level or the league office level, that just doesn't think Shad, tremendous. Shad Khan is doing exciting things down in Jacksonville. He's going to figure that out with the on-field. He's bringing analytics in. I'm not the biggest proponent of analytics in football, but I love what he's doing. I've not met anyone who hasn't spoken very highly of Shad Khan.
And I just want to add, being a Champaign, Illinois native and a graduate of the University of Illinois, where Chad is built his business, went to school from Urbana, Illinois, from Flexigate. He's been a huge proponent of Illinois for a long time. And so yeah, the community that that I grew up in, it's great to see that he's really rose to that level. So he's a great businessman, very smart.
So I have a question for you. Does Shad Khan move the Jaguars to London?
Ooh, interesting question. Well, let's think about it. If the league ultimately does want a team in London full time, and there's still some question about that, but let's assume, what?
Crazy. It's crazy.
Oh, okay.
But that's what
Yeah, by the way, I share some
Right.
of those sentiments. I thought you were saying I was crazy.
No.
If the league, let's just assume for the sake of this discussion that the league does want a team in London full time. Well, you're not going to take a team that's in a magnificent brand new stadium like Dallas or like.
She's from Jacksonville. You can't be dissing Jacksonville.
No, hear me. I'm making.
Jacksonville, the Cleveland of the South.
I'm making some business points here.
We said the year that the Super Bowl was there.
I'm actually going to get to the point at some point that it may not be Jacksonville. But think about it logically. You're not going to move a team that's in a magnificent brand new stadium like the Cowboys or like the 49ers soon will be or like the Patriots. You're not going to move a team that has a long-term lease or other obligation which cannot be mitigated at a reasonable cost. You're not going to move a team that has just astonishing amounts of debt service remaining on its facility. Who are you going to move? If you do decide to move a team, you're going to move what I'll call a franchise-free agent, a team that doesn't have a long-term lease commitment or a wonderful building.
Oakland Raiders.
So, there's... Apparently, Andrea's next career is going to be Comedy Central. So, the teams that are always talked about in the mix for moving are teams like Jacksonville, St. Louis now, as a result of, for all you law students, they just had a very, very successful outcome in their arbitration with the St. Louis Visitors and Convention Bureau. They become a franchise free agent after next year. But then there's the bigger
Oakland
issue.
Raiders.
Then there's the bigger issue, and
I just can't see it. I mean, so Tuesdays in the NFL.
This was my whole speech on Tuesdays.
Oh.
I went on the Tuesday bender. Are you going to go on the Tuesday bender about why London won't work?
Yeah.
London won't work on Tuesdays.
Right. Do you know why? What? Why? Anybody know?
And what happens in NFL teams
No.
on
What happens
Tuesdays?
on NFL teams on Tuesday? So Sunday you play
Wait, I
Sunday
heard
or
an
you
answer.
play
I heard an
Monday,
answer.
and you get all these injuries. What happens on Tuesday? Anybody know?
Someone I heard say it. That's when teams bring in free agents.
Right.
They bring in 2, 5, 10, 12 free agents in to work out. Maybe to fill a
Because
void.
teams always have what they call a ready list, which means that, we're not talking Aaron Rodgers goes down, you need a quarterback. We're talking your tackle goes down, you now need a third, you need depth. So every team on Tuesday, the off day, brings guys.
And here's what
How are you
happens.
going to bring somebody to London?
Well, here's what happens. You bring the players in. They go out on the field. You uniform them. They were in shorts and T-shirts, but you take them to the equipment room. They go out on the field. And then who comes down and watches them work out? The general manager? Any scouts or personnel guys in the building? the head coach,
Position
and the
coach.
position coach. So if you're working out a wide receiver, the receiver coach is going to come out. The strength and conditioning coach, your trainers, your doctors, they're all going to be watching these tryouts. Well, you're not going to fly some kid who's in California or Colorado to London on a Tuesday. So when I raised this to the people at the league and said, how are you going to deal with that? Their answer was, well, the London team could have a remote facility in the United States. The workout could go on. You could videotape the workout, but that doesn't help. You're not getting all those people out on the field on a Tuesday. I think there's tremendous logistical challenges with London. I will also say this, and now having worked for the NFL for almost 30 years and now working for CBS, those two have in common that they're New York-based companies. There's a certain sense of people that live in New York that sort of the world revolves around New York. And there's this whole other coast of the country called California. I would have this conversation with the league office repeatedly, which is we are one of the 50 states. We're on a different time zone. We have a lot of electoral votes. We vote late at night. But, you know, we're one of the 50 states. And it's one thing if you're based in London and you need to send someone back to your East Coast base ops. California is really far from London.
But there's just generally, I mean, even in the media, the way the media covers, there's a huge East Coast bias. I mean, there's.
We know.
I mean, it's amazing.
We know. We know.
I asked then a little bit of a different topic here. On one hand, the sport's more popular than ever. The NFL is more popular than ever. On the other hand, this health issue is not going away.
It's not.
And that's being felt in high school and Pop Warner. Those numbers are descending pretty rapidly, I think. Mm-hmm. So the health issue will continue to be covered. The information we'll get in the upcoming years will be worse about the effects of football on the human body. So how is the sport different in 10 or 15 years because of this recognition?
Let me ask one question. Raise your hand if you're comfortable sharing this information. Raise your hand if you have a son. Okay?
Keep your hands up. Raise your hand if you have a son.
Would you let your son play football?
Right. Put your hand down if you would not let him play football.
Polling is pretty persuasive on that issue. It's very negative.
I like the polling in this room. We just proved your numbers.
No, I'll let Andrea answer. She is the NFL's health and safety correspondent, but I will simply weigh in that it is not going away. The issue's not going away. It's not only football. I mean, they're learning it now about kids in soccer with the headers, and it's football. But football is, I hear people say all the time, football's a contact sport. Football's a collision sport. Football is a collision sport, and by definition, your job is to hit someone if you are on defense. I think the game will look very different in 15 years, but boy, do I want to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, I don't think the game's going to go away because it's a business. And I hate to draw the analogy, you know, cigarettes haven't gone away. And a lot of the same issues exist with tobacco and with NFL. And
that's a great point.
I think that, I mean, I hear this a lot. The changes that the NFL has made, it was just in reaction to the lawsuit, right? That was just settled for $765 million. And my response to that is maybe yes, maybe no. But I don't care what the motivation is as long as the changes are being made. And the changes are being made.
And they are, and the changes are being made, and they're good changes.
And when
but ultimately, the issue still is there, right?
The issues are still there. Where it really concerns me is at the youth level. I mean, I did a story last year on a Pop Warner team of 10 and 11-year-olds where 5 kids suffered concussions in one game. It was just horrific. And everybody was complicit. You know, the coaches and the administrators and the refs and the parents, and it was just horrible to have this done. And I ended up, you know, everybody wants to talk to those people, but nobody wants to talk to the kids. I talked to the kids. So I had all the kids sitting there. And I said to them, well, what do you think? You think you want to play next year? And most of the kids are kind of like, well, and then one kid goes quietly, I don't think so. And I heard him, and I go, why? And he goes, I'm scared. And that, to me, is the big issue. Well, because if kids are scared to play, and the terrible thing is the kid could be scared to play and the parents still want him out there.
Well, I wrote a piece, I'm sorry.
That's the concern. And so a lot of the initiatives that are being done, teaching heads-up tackling and proper equipment fitting and concussion recognition, things of that nature, they're all good. The problem with youth football is it's like the Wild West. There's no uniformity in it. You think of Pop Warner, it's sort of Kleenex, it's the brand name, but it's only, 10, 15% of all the youth football that's out there. There's so many different leagues out there, and there's no uniformity at all. And that's what is of a concern. Kurt Warner, who, the terrific quarterback, Super Bowl winning quarterback for the Rams and played for the Giants and the Cardinals, a lot of these players, they teach their sons, if my son really wants to play, at least I'm going to coach him because I know it's going to be the right way. The problem is your son may know what to do, but if his son is playing against him and doesn't know what to do, it doesn't make that much of a difference. And there's a lack of uniformity that comes into play. Yes, ma'am.
We're sitting in a law school. So let me make a legal point here with some of you, and we really will go Socratic. I wrote a piece for Monday Morning Quarterback several months ago, and one of my bullet points was, if you ran a high school, let's leave it at the high school level, but I broadened it to youth football. If you were a high school administrator, if you were an educator, if you were a high school principal, would you even include football as one of the athletic choices at your high school? Let's look at it simply from a liability standpoint. A liability standpoint. Take the morals out for a minute. Take the ethics out for a minute. From a liability standpoint, why would you offer football? Because we hear stories around the country about kids that die on the football field.
5 since August.
What? So, I understand all the money that's there at the collegiate level. Let's look at high school. Would you offer? My concern about the game is that ultimately what we start seeing is caste distinctions and class distinctions and economic distinctions between who plays and who doesn't. And what I don't want to see happen is 20 years from now, you're essentially watching Roman gladiators.
Some people think MMA is that already.
How it has impacted football and also reporting on football.
So I'm just curious. So, since this event started, anybody tweet? Yeah. Okay. So I've seen some people take pictures going up on Facebook.
Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter.
Right.
I'll say one thing and turn it over to Andrea because she is in this all the time. I think it has had a tremendous effect. Both in terms of the way that people cover the teams. What happened to, Nancy and I have talked about this, what has happened to journalism where you check your facts, you recheck your facts, you know that your writing is true. Now it's a rush to get your 140 characters out, where I'm going to tweet, I'm going to Tumblr, I'm going to Snapchat, I'm going to Facebook, I'm going to Sulia, whatever you're going to do, you gotta be first. It doesn't matter if you're right. You got to be first, and that's just the media component of it. The other component of it is you have to be cognizant that anything you do, look, the Falcons mascot this week, the Falcons have this falcon, this bird thing.
Imagine that.
And he's a mascot, and the Falcons went and did something absolutely wonderful with a youth suicide prevention hotline, and then the bird, I didn't know birds had fingers, the bird tweeted something so injudicious about, if the team keeps performing as it does, maybe he'll need the suicide. It was just horrible, horrible. You got to think, I actually have an invention, and some lawyer, law student here is going to I need the rights to this. You know that if someone has had a difficulty with drinking, they can't start their car before breathing into something? You should not be able to tweet before you breathe into your phone. It's my invention.
I don't know if I can top that. It's changed it in every imaginable way. I mean, from a journalistic standpoint, well, it used to be that if you wanted to prepare, you know, you had to read all the newspapers and then you had to read everything on the internet. Now, you know, you need to have every single Twitter feed to find out. I think that, you know, look at this situation now with Richie Incognito and Jonathan Martin. This is, to me, this is like a petri dish for the social media for a variety of reasons. Not only is potentially, did it all come out because they found his text messages and things of that nature, but you get instantaneous feedback on the whole situation from around the league. And you know, and it's been surprising to some people because you'd think that you'd want to have support for the player who may have been bullied, but you have all these other players coming out and saying, well, he broke the code, he shouldn't have said what really went on in the locker room, and you know, and
there's such a rush to judgment.
Yeah,
and that rush to judgment is fed by the instantaneous nature of tweets and things like that.
Right, and I mean, to me, the genesis of it was talk radio.
Interesting.
Talk radio, well, because talk radio was the opportunity. I mean, it used to be, what's the worst thing that could happen? You could sit at the TV set and you could, you know, take, you know, one of your kids' stuffed animals and throw it at the TV and be so frustrated. Or, well, then all of a sudden, now you got talk radio. I can call up. I can call anybody. I'm like the general manager. I'm going to voice my, hey, I'm all for free speech and all that sort of stuff. But the vitriol, I mean, I like to remind people, and believe me, I'm not saying this in a Pollyanna-ish way, but you know, a player's wife is sitting in here, and I know that I'm speaking for her. Just think about this the next time you invoke curse words about a player or something because he just blew a tackle or he dropped a. It's somebody's son, and it's probably somebody's. Yeah, it could be somebody's husband.
It's a lot worse when it's not their wife. It's when it's their little child.
I mean, I'll tell you this. Just a quick story. Monday night game. You probably remember the year because I was there, and I think you were there too. Monday night game, 49ers.
I wasn't there.
No, but you're probably watching because you watch everything. Ken Norton.
I remember the game.
Linebacker. You know, it's one of these situations where you have a pile up and people are rolling around. Ken Norton broke Bryant Young's leg, but it was a compound fracture. It was horrific.
It was horrible.
You know, with the bone coming through. It was awful. And Bryant Young's season was over, and everybody's talking about Bryant Young. Ken Norton was traumatized. I mean, so upset that he did this to his teammate. This happens on a Monday night. I go out to the Niners on Wednesday to do a story, not on Bryant Young, but on Ken Norton, because people forget that, you know, there's two parties involved here. So I think our interview was scheduled for before practice, about 11 o'clock in the morning. And I get out there, and you know, you're kind of used to hurrying up and wait, and that's fine. And the PR guy says to me, Kenny's still going to do the interview, but he's not here right now. And I go, well, where is he? And the PR guy says to me, he'll tell you when he gets here. And kind of had a quizzical look on his face. Go to practice. Ken's out there for practice. Comes in to sit down with me after practice. I'm like, you all right? What happened? He drove his kid to school, his little daughter to school, and drops her off, and about a half an hour later gets a call from the school, you got to come and pick her up. Because the kids were just taunting the little girl. Your husband hurt Bryant, your father hurt Bryant Young, your father did this to him. And the poor little girl's crying. he had to go to school and pick up his little daughter, who probably doesn't even know who Bryant Young is. And I will never forget that, because here's a guy who felt pretty bad about what he did anyway, but his children are paying the price of it. And so, you know, the next time somebody goes to tweet something really bad about a player or whatever, just think, you know, what if somebody said that about you or your kid or whatever? There's just got to be some perspective. And I'm sorry for the long-winded, I mean, it still really resonates for me. There's no perspective. There's just the vitriol and the anger, and it's just morphed from.
And you know, Andrea talked about the anger and the vitriol. I get annoyed with the accuracy issue, that people will tweet anything without any regard to whether it's, there's not journalists left, in, you know, there's not a lot of Nancy Gays around, there's not a lot of Andrea Kremers around, maybe we're of an older.
Dinosaurs, we're dinosaurs.
Be right. You don't have to be first,
but you can say anything.
You've got to be right.
But you can say
and there
anything.
are no consequences anymore for tweeting something that's wholly inaccurate, because then you just tweet, oh, my bad, you know, sorry. But you've damaged something. Go.
It's probably going to be our last question of the night, so go for it. Take our last.
Make it a good one.
Are we supposed to go to 7? Oh, it is 7. Oh, that clicks wrong.
Oh, we were using that.
Time slows.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, sir.
In traditionally male-dominated industries, anytime a woman is successful and rises to the top or near the top, she gets branded as a successful woman in a male-dominated industry. Except for a few rare people. Amy Trask comes to mind, Doris Burke comes to mind, Pat Summitt comes to mind. And I'm just curious, not that any of the other people who rise to the top are incredible, but what about these few people makes them seem to even rise above that tremendously demeaning brush that so many other credible and successful people are painted with?
I love that as the last question.
I don't know what that means.
I actually thought you were going somewhere a little bit different, which was humorous when you said anytime a woman rises to a certain level of success and accomplishment, she gets branded And I thought the next word out of your mouth was going to be
right, I agree.
Rhymes with witch. And I'll tell you just something funny about that before I get to your question. My husband and I were discussing this once because someone was just all outraged and saying, you know, how come whenever a woman is successful, she's called a bitch? And I don't think that's true.
Men are aggressive, women are bitches.
No. Okay, that was the debate we were having. No. Sometimes, can I swear? Okay.
The cameras are gone, right?
Yeah.
It's just Twitter and Facebook and everything else.
Okay, wait.
Now.
If I say what I want to say, you all need to promise you're not tweeting this.
No tweeting. No.
What?
Oh, they
Oh,
are.
I can't say it then.
Recording.
I can't say it then. Okay. Yeah, I can. I'll make it rhyme. We were having this discussion about, and this is why I don't focus on gender differences the way a lot of other people do. And again, I get it. I lived in a rarefied world where I didn't need to be as focused on it. But I've never focused on gender differences the way that many people do. So we were having this intellectual debate, and someone said to us, how come a woman is branded rhymes with a witch, and a man is branded aggressive? And my husband and I both said, no, sometimes a woman is branded rhymes with a witch, and a man is branded rhymes with ick. So I don't know that gender difference is really there as much. It probably
Old
is.
Saint Nick? Is that it?
Oh, yeah. I don't know what the answer to your question is.
I want to leave you with a funny.
And I'll just.
Go ahead.
I think it's a heck of a great question, proven by the fact that I don't know that I even know the answer, and you'd kind of think I might have a sense of what it is, and I don't know the answer.
Do you have a question?
I was just going to say they have to be twice as good. That's how they rise to the top. It's sort of like putting politics aside, Condoleezza Rice.
Isn't she magnificent? Oh, wow.
Isn't that the answer?
Well,
maybe.
What I found is,
harder.
and this is just what I tell women who are breaking into this business.
Listen, Anya, write this down.
You have to understand that there is a double standard that exists. Okay, so if it's ESPN and if Linda Cohn makes a mistake, God, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But if Chris Berman makes a mistake, it's boomer, it's all right.
Oh, no, I think it's just as bad.
No, I believe that this, so you know what? You have to understand that the margin for error for a woman is very small. And I was never daunted by that. I didn't need any motivation to always be right. That was always my goal anyway. You just have to know it exists. And the only way you can ever change things is just by your actions. I mean, you can't talk it out.
And you know what? This may sum up and be a very good way to end, which is a difference. Andrea was always motivated by the desire to always be the best and always be right. And I always knew that there were going to be a lot of times I would make mistakes. And I was always motivated to build the absolute best team of people around me so that together, when one of us raised our hand and said, I made a mistake, we could all fix it together.
Well, guess what, honey? You're now on live television, so you're going to be in my world, which is all about making mistakes. But so I want to leave you with the story because we talked about this. We talked about wanting to share the story because we hadn't really talked about it.
The Twitter thing.
And it reminds me of Twitter. So here's the difference in life now. Okay.
It's a perfect answer to the Twitter question.
This is a perfect answer to your Twitter question. So, I was pregnant and showing, and I was up here doing a game, the Raiders, and Amy said I was flying back home to LA, and Amy said,
my husband was on the same flight the next morning.
Rob's
going to LA for business.
Why don't I pick you up at the hotel and I'll just drop you both off at the airport? So I said, okay, that's great. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Drops us both off at the airport, and
this is not too long after 9/11.
Monday mornings, Southwest, the lines like around the corner. So I say to Rob, you know what? They're usually pretty good when they see you. They're not going to make me wait in this long line, and so I'm just going to go up that way. So I head for TSA, and he heads. I go, no, just come with me. Just come with me. It's all right. Come on, come with me. So we walk together, and the TS agent sees me and, lets me right through. And then Rob sort of goes to follow, and he stops him. And I look at the TS agent, and I go, oh, come on. He did this to me, And I think the guy was so mortified that I said this that he let Rob go through. We joked. Can you imagine if this was today? Husband of Raiders executive, impregnate, is the father of Andrea Kremer's love child. That's the difference between then and now.
Because that's the answer to your question. If that happened today, what year was that? That was like,
I don't even remember.
It was shortly after 9/11, I think, the lines, whenever it was.
Right.
If that happened today, there would be pictures of Andrea and my husband. They'd be on Facebook, they'd be on Instagram, they'd be on Snapchat. People would be tweeting that my husband has impregnated someone who worked for ESPN. I mean, it would be everywhere.
But and it would be wrong. To this day, her husband is still called my SH, my surrogate husband, to this day. So we thank you so much for listening. And thank you.
And thank you, Andrea and Amy. You two were amazing. I think everybody got a lot out of this. I want to make sure that I thank Susan Robinson, who's the Associate Dean of Career Services here at Stanford, who made this all possible. And also Darcy Malone, our Denise DePardo York Fellow, who put all the work in to make this happen. So
and to Hannah, and also some of the folks that we did mention that we mentioned. Thank you very much.
And here I sit, almost 3-decade Raider who graduated from Cal,